Welcome back to hour 2 of day 2 of Disaster Week here on iThemes Training, sponsored by iThemes Security Pro. We've had a great hour of training just before this. Lots of great questions and answers to Michael Moore. In this hour, our presenter is Timothy Jacobs. Timothy is the lead developer for iThemes Security. He's also a WordPress core contributor and a maintainer of the WordPress REST API. Welcome, Timothy. Really excited to have you here today.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Absolutely. Well, give us just a quick overview of what the next hour will cover.
Yeah, so I'm going to go over kind of at a high level. We're not going to get super into the weeds in terms of talking about actual code and functions and filters and hooks and things like that, but hopefully give you some examples of some cool things that you can do with iThemes Security that you might not have known about, that I would hazard to guess you probably don't know about. And there are code samples, and of course, the slides are available in the chat, so you can grab those later if you want to and do some digging. But we're not going to be going super over like, this is this function, and these are these classes, and these are these PHP things, but just more show you some cool examples of things that you can do with iThemes Security.
Very good. So if you can copy
on the more technical side of things.
Yeah, so if you can copy and paste code into your functions.php or a custom functions plugin, you can use this.
Yeah, and actually that's one of the things that I'll be mentioning in a slide is a plugin that I really recommend is the snippets plugin on WordPress.org. I believe it's called Code Snippets, and I have a link in one of my slides here. But it's a really great way for managing collections of snippets, and you can give them tags and things like that to help keep them organized and turn them on, turn them off, stuff like that.
Yeah, very good. All right, so the live captioning is back up working. Same link as the first hour. We did not change those links this time, so you can access the live transcript if you would like using that blue button down below the chat. I just verified that's working and typing as I speak. Also, the link for day 2, hour 2 slides is there in the chat room as well. I'm going to drop that in once again and ask your questions as normal. Timothy will have a good Ask Me Anything at the end of this as well if you're up for it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so anything security related, whether or not it's part of this particular topic or not, you have the opportunity to ask your WordPress security questions from a real expert in the field. So Timothy, let me turn it over to you and let's get started.
Okay, yeah. So this is getting the most out of iThemes Security. You could say in parentheses here for power users. I'm going to link off to a couple of things first. This is a help article that we have about editing your WP-config.php file. And this is something that I'm not going to cover how you go about doing, but we have a couple of different articles on the Help Center, and this is one of them. And we have some other places that you can look it up. In WordPress.org, there's lots of places. If you Google how to edit my WP-config file, you'll find a number of resources to help you do that. I'm not going to show it, but there are a couple of things, these first few, which will require you to edit your WP-config file if you want to use them. So the first thing I want to talk about is feature flags. We have a way in iThemes Security that allows us to send out new features on a more experimental basis that users who are interested in testing the latest and greatest thing before it's 100% production ready can do so. We don't use this feature often, though it's something we're probably using more often going forward. The way you do this is you enable it with the ITSEC show feature flags constant. And so that's one of those constants that you need to set in your WP config file. And when you do that, well, that is not the right screenshot. When you do that, instead of seeing the hide backend, if you look a little on the right there, there's a tab that says feature flags. And I guess I took a screenshot of the hide backend settings. But you'll see a feature flags page there, which does in fact have a list of experimental features that you can enable. There aren't any in iThemes Security right now, but this is something that Michael wanted me to tell you all about because it's something we'll probably be using more often going forward, and we'll write about them when they become available and if they become available, things like that. The other feature that I wanted to tell you all about that you also, this one you probably might have heard of if you've talked with some of our helpful support folks, is debug mode. So this is a mode in iThemes Security that'll let you get some more diagnostic information about how iThemes Security is running. there are troubleshooting and testing tools that you can use, some that are a little more advanced than the ones that we show you in the tools page in the iThemes security user interface. You can view and edit raw settings data from this screen, which can sometimes be helpful when you're trying to diagnose some more advanced and difficult things. And you enable this one with the ITSEC debug constant in your WP config file as well. And so that'll show you this screen here. So you can see under security, we have this new menu item called debug. And up at the top of the screen here, we have this system info box that provides a whole bunch of like detailed information about your site's configuration, how security is set up, things like that. And then we have this settings editing interface that I talked about. And so I've selected the global module here. And if you wanted to, you would be able to go through here. You can see all the setting values as we store them in the database. And this includes some things that we don't even expose in the user interface. And you can go ahead and make edits here. This is one of those things where it's probably possible that you'll have a hard time breaking iThemes security from this page, though it does look scary. We do the same kind of validation that we do when you interact with iThemes security through the UI, as if you're interacting with it through this page. But I would exercise caution. But this can be a helpful thing. Sometimes we just need to bypass the UI and get to something really quickly, or other times when you have some other hidden settings that you want to be able to edit, or ones that might not necessarily be exposed to you right now, depending on how your site is configured. And then we also get this section here, that's the scheduler. So there are lots of things that happen in iThemes security on a schedule, like flushing files, checking for outdated software, running the security check pro scans, clearing out tokens, things like this, purging lockouts. And from this screen, you can run those manually if you need to. And again, this is a kind of more debugging thing. Sometimes you're experimenting with different features. You want to be able to do that now, you can do that. And you can even completely reset the scheduling system of iThemes security from this page. And that can be helpful sometimes. Things get confused and scheduled events go away, particularly if you are migrating things between servers and things like that. It doesn't happen all the time, but sometimes it does. And this is a place where you can reset that information. So yeah, next is code snippets. And this is what I was talking about. This is a really awesome plugin on WordPress.org. For the next couple of code snippets that I'm going to be providing, this is probably the way I would recommend using it. Also, you can go in, if you have a child theme set up, you can use functions.php. If you have a site-specific code plugin already set up, you can do that as well. But if you're not comfortable with that, this is a user interface-based way that you can kind of make those changes and keep everything organized. Okay, so let's get to one of them. The first one I want to talk about is the lockout screen. So this is the lockout screen that you get by default in iThemes security. And there are a couple of actions and filters that let us make some customizations. The first one is adding custom actions. We have this ITSEC lockout action links filter that you can use. And you can use this to add additional actions or additional buttons to the iThemes security lockout page. And so the way I have this one set up is that I'm using a mail to link that is pointing to, let's say, for instance, my support URL for my company. And I'm giving it a label of contact support. And then when a user gets locked out, they'll see this screen and they'll get a nice contact support link. And they can click on that link to get more help with their site if they got locked out, or if they have users that got locked out. You can imagine how this might be helpful in certain circumstances. You can also get more advanced with it. So I'm not going to dive into like all of what this code means, but we can say we get information about the lockout that occurred that caused iThemes security to lock out the user. And we can say, okay, let's only show the support link, though, if it was an admin user that got locked out. And so that's what's happening in this code snippet here, is we're saying, okay, if this isn't a user that can manage the options of the site, don't show them as information. But for clients, let's say our client get locked out, we can provide an action link on the lockout screen that gives them an easy place to hit email, or we could send it to our contact form, whatever. We can also render completely custom content on the lockout page. And so in this example, I have a YouTube video that I included in here. For me, this is just one of my favorite clips from the IT crowd, but for you, it might be a tutorial on what to do if your site gets locked out. You might want to just have a lot more text, point to some other places, maybe even embed a help form that you have through like Zendesk or something like that. All those options are available to you. You can render essentially whatever you want here. The next thing I wanted to talk about was the security dashboard. So Michael did a great webinar about the security dashboard last year, I believe, called Maximizing Your iThemes Security Dashboard. And one of the things that he goes over is setting up client dashboards. So you set up an iThemes security dashboard that is for your clients, and your clients can only see what's on that dashboard. And you would typically hide iThemes security from them. But sometimes you might not be able to have that option where you can just say to your client, hey, you don't have any access to iThemes security. Sometimes they want to see it. But sometimes you want them to see the dashboard and you have to let them see the dashboard. You don't want them to see all the cards that are available in the dashboard. And so you can use this filter, the ITSEC dashboard cards filter, to remove certain dashboard cards from the list. So in this case, I'm removing the fingerprinting dashboard, which is also known as trusted devices. And you can see now the trusted devices dashboard, the trusted devices dashboard card no longer shows up in the edit cards interface. And so you can exclude any of those cards using that filter if you wanted to. Like I said, I would recommend my preferred way to set up iThemes security for clients is to, if you need to, give them administrator access to the site, but hide iThemes security from them and set them up with a security dashboard. And you can check out Michael's talk here about how you can go about doing that. There's some other cool things that you can do as well. We have this framework called the Highlighted Logs framework. And this lets you give a little spot on the dashboard where you can have important log items get highlighted for you. And it'll show you the most recent time that this happened. So this is a code snippet that is registering a highlight that'll say, whenever someone overrides two-factor using iThemes Sync, let's populate a notice for it. And so that'll show up in the security admin messages right there for you. And it'll say two-factor, sync override. It'll give you a description. And if you see that little 3 dots on the side there, you can click that, and that'll bring you to the full details in the log for that log item. And you can see all the information about it. And so that's a quick and easy way that if you want to highlight a particular log so that you see it all the time, you can do it with that little code snippet. Another example that might be interesting is highlighting all the times when your clients log in. So you can highlight the most recent time that any of these users have logged in. I have this array here called clients with admin in it. And you could add the usernames of any of your client users or any users that you want to monitor. And we're registering a highlight for them that says, when is the last time this user logged in? And then it will show up in the dashboard like this. And so you can say user logging, the admin logged in. This happened March 9th, 2 hours ago. You might be wondering how you can kind of like figure out that information about user logging in the user-log-in. So yes, it would need the exact username for your client in that pre-configured code snippet. And so the way that you would get that information about the module or the code is you can look at the raw details section of logs. And we can see here the module, and you can see where I selected in the code, it's set to user logging, and the code is user-logged-in. And what I'm using is, instead of replacing the one, I'm replacing it with the user ID of the user that I want to check out. Another example, and this is one that we have a help article about, is limiting the allowed two-factor methods. Something that happens occasionally for people is that they want their users to be able to set up two-factor, but they get confused with setting up the mobile two-factor method where you have an app and an Authy code and things like that. And you want to keep that two-factor method available to you and maybe to your clients, that you can teach how to use Authy and Google Authenticator securely. But for the rest of the users of your site, you only want them to use the two-factor email method. And so this isn't a setting that we expose in the user interface because we think for most people it isn't necessary. But if you did want this kind of behavior, you could use this code snippet. So we're saying, here are the allowed providers for this user. And if the user doesn't have permissions to manage options, they don't have permission to edit the site, they're not an administrator, then the only two-factor method they're allowed to use is the two-factor email method. And that'll hopefully let them set up two-factor, use two-factor, but without getting themselves confused with using Authy or some of those more complex things. And you can see that in an example here. I have this subscriber user that I've set up on my site, and the only two-factor method that they now have available is email, even though the mobile methods and backup codes are available for everyone else. Another cool thing is reCAPTCHA. So we try and integrate reCAPTCHA with a whole suite of popular plugins like WooCommerce out of the box, but we don't have support for everything. And we won't have support or if you have custom functionality in your site that you might want to protect with a reCAPTCHA. But what we do provide is a really cool API that makes it super simple to integrate with our reCAPTCHA API. You just call the display function and say whatever action you're protecting, and then you call the validate function with whatever action you're protecting. And iThemes Security will take care of everything else for you. And you'll be able to confidently say, okay, this custom form I have on my site, this custom email sign up or whatever is protected by iThemes Security Google reCAPTCHA. And this is just a couple of lines of code, but you can check out the Help Center article that I've linked there to see way more details about how this works. So you wouldn't need to change any iThemes security settings with this reCAPTCHA snippet. The only thing you need to make sure that you do is to include the API keys and set it up as normal. You don't need to do anything else beyond that. You can just use this snippets anywhere. And to enable it in WooCommerce, you just need to check the checkbox on the iThemes security page. So the last part that I wanted to get into is WP-CLI. WP-CLI is one of my favorite features of WordPress. And it is very cool if you're a more technical user for being able to move more quickly, especially when you're managing dozens or even hundreds of sites. WP-CLI.org is an example, is one of the documentation sites for WP-CLI, and I'll link off to WordPress.org's documentation and some other bits of information about it. And this is a WordPress TV talk that talked about WP-CLI recently. That I think is really excellent. I'm not going to dive into kind of the more cool things with setting up WP-CLI in general or how you can integrate it with other things. I'm just going to kind of show you some of the cool WP-CLI commands that exist in iThemes security. But I would really, if this seems interesting to you, I would really check it out. One of the things that is cool about it is that you can set up a WP-CLI command in a WP-CLI environment and have it run that command on all of the sites that you list. So if you manage 100 sites, you can have WP-CLI automatically run that command over 100 different sites, and different cool features like that for automating things and scripting things together. And I'm not going to, like I said, dive into how that works, but if that sounds interesting to you, I would check out that talk. That's the wp.me link, and I would check out wp-cli.org for some more general information. The other thing is that WP-CLI comes with built-in help for everything. So if you run the WP command with help and then the name of the command after it, that will give you essentially information about how that command works. And so if you ever are at a point where like, oh, what does this do exactly? You can run WP help and whatever command you're trying out, and it will give you help for that. The first one that I wanted to talk about is not one that's built into iThemes security actually, but is part of all of our products at iThemes, which is the iThemes licensing activate and deactivate commands. This lets you automatically license with the iThemes licenser your site without needing to go into the user interface. So if you have a site, for instance, that might be deployed with some special thing with Git deployment or things like that, and you want to script your setup process, you can do that using the iThemes licensing command to activate or deactivate your iThemes license. Here is a list of a bunch of the commands that exist in iThemes security. And the way I was able to generate this is, again, by using that WP help command from before. So WP help ITSEC. And it'll spit out this list of commands for you. And so I'm going to take a look at a couple of them with you here. The first, along that thought process of setting up a new site with iThemes security, is the import and export commands. So if you didn't know, in iThemes Security 7.0 that we released just recently, there is a completely new revamped import-export feature. And one of the things that it comes with is a whole suite of WP-CLI commands. And so one of those is for creating a new export. So we can run this WP ITSEC import, export, create. It's a bit of a mouthful, but you can copy and paste that to create a new export. So you can see that in an example here. We're creating a new export. We're giving it a title called security template. We're including these specific sources, and we're saving it to an export.json file. And then when we set up a new site, we can pass it the path to that export.json file. And so that can, if you're setting up new sites really frequently, and that's something that you're already scripted part of your setup process, you've already using WP core install, things like that, and you want to figure out, hey, how can I set up iThemes security for these new sites? You can do it using these two commands. There's further steps you can then do. You can enroll that site in network brute force. And so that's our network of all the sites that are running iThemes security that band together to prevent attackers from getting into your sites. And they share a list of banned IPs. And you can enroll into that with just one WP-CLI command and get that site set up with it. Another cool feature and something that I have used actually kind of recently with WP-CLI and iThemes security is you can use it for kind of getting detailed information about what just happened to your site. Maybe you suspect that there is a hack going on. Maybe you suspect there is an unauthorized login, something like that. You can quickly go through the log items through WP-CLI. And this is one of those features that is why we recommend that you always store your iThemes security logs in the database at least. You can store them in the database and in files, but I would recommend storing them in the database at a minimum, because then you can do this kind of advanced searching to figure out what's going on. So here I'm searching for all of the times that a user has logged in the user logging module. And if I was looking at this list, I could notice immediately that something was off. There's this log item down here that says, oh, that's an IP address that I don't recognize. Maybe I should dig in more there, search more based on that IP address. I could also scroll through and see all of the recent lockouts that happened. And so this is beyond just the list of active lockouts that you would see on the security dashboard, but this would show you the most recent 10 lockouts that happened. And if you wanted, there are other WP-CLI commands that you can run to show more, show less, filter by dates, things like that. And those are, again, you can find those in the help for the log command. And you can lastly go and dive into way more detail. So I'm now getting log information about this particular log item that I found, and I can see that it was a brute force attack. I can see what information they provided, how they tried to log in. I can get kind of this like detailed information at the tip of my fingers if I'm an advanced WP-CLI user. And that can help me when I'm trying to go quickly and recover from maybe a hack that just happened on my site. You can even integrate with the geolocation services that are built into iThemes security, particularly if you're using trusted devices. So we might have saw that IP address that looked a little bit suspicious. I can type WP ITSEC geo and locate and that IP address, and it'll tell me the latitude and longitude of that IP address, and it'll give me a label associated with that IP address. And so it's saying that this is an IP address that exists in Singapore. I can also look through recent bans that happened. So maybe I want to check that, is this a ban that iThemes security was able to do automatically? And I can see, okay, these are the last bans that happened in the last week or so from my site. And I can review those. I can see how they were created, when they were created, where they're stored. And if I wanted to, I could even create a ban myself from this interface by saying ban create, giving it the host name, and I can even get a comment that says why I added this banned IP. And I can integrate with lockouts as well. So I can see, let's say my client says, hey, I can't get into my site right now. You ask them what their IP address is, and then you can look through the list of lockouts, filtering by their IP address, and we can say, oh, that's that IP address. This is the lockout ID. Let's release it right at the command line. And I don't even have to log into my site, dig in through the user interface. I can just quickly SSH into it. Again, with kind of like looking to your site, recovering after a hack, you can run the site scanner from iThemes security. And so in this first example, it's saying there's a clean, there's nothing wrong. But you could see in a second example that it tells you that there's vulnerable software. And then you can know that you can dig in with the log commands to figure out what's going on in more detail if you want to get more information but you can get a quick high-level overview and initialize a new scan immediately from the command line. You can do the same thing with file change, for instance. You can run the file change scan, and it will give you helpful progress as it says, okay, this is what step I'm at now, this is what step I'm at now, so on and so forth. And this is a great use case for WP-CLI because your site won't time out usually over WP-CLI. When it's running as WP-CLI, it can run this process for minutes and minutes and minutes without there being an issue. But we have to do all sorts of complexities to make sure that it doesn't time out when you're doing it through the user interface. You can also interact with kind of general features in iThemes security. So if I wanted to activate the backup module, I can do that from the command line by running modules activate backup. I can edit certain settings. So I see the interval setting is listed as 3 days, but maybe I want to check that to only backup once a week. I could do that quickly from the command line. And I can even do some cool things with two-factor. So I can say, let's remind the user that they need to set up two-factor and give it the user ID to send them an email to. I can manually enable two-factor methods for that user without needing to log into the site or log in as their user. I can just set it for them from the command line. And I can even reconfigure a two-factor method from the command line. So let's say my client comes and tells me, hey, I'm out of backup codes. I ignored all the warnings. I didn't generate new ones. Can you send me new backup codes? You now know how to do it by just running this WP-CLI command. And you don't have to figure out their username, log into their site, things like that. You can just run a WP-CLI command to get it for you. And lastly, we have the suite of tools. So these are the tools that we populate in the advanced section of iThemes security. But you can also run these via the WP-CLI command line as well. And you can see all the different tools that we have listed there. And if we wanted to, for instance, regenerate the server config rules, we can do that by just running tool server config rules, and it'll regenerate everything for you. And so that's it for me. This was kind of like a quick overview of some of the more cool and advanced things that you can do with iThemes security. And I hope it was interesting, maybe get your heads spinning as to like, hey, maybe this is something that I could do with iThemes security, or a new way I could set up my workflow, particularly those of you that have dozens and dozens of sites that you're managing. I think learning WP-CLI and learning some of these more advanced features of it is one of the best ways that you can take your skills to the next level and really accelerate how you work.
All right, very good. Interesting stuff in this hour. Oop, I was muted. I'm having trouble with the mute button today. I apologize, folks. Great stuff in this last hour, Timothy. So we have plenty of time for Q&A here, and that can be about anything that we just talked about here in this last hour or any other security-related questions that you have. Just drop those in the chat room at iThemes.com/chat. We will remind you of that great special that's on your screen there. Take advantage of those deals on the plugin suite and on the individual iThemes plugins. Also want to remind you, before we get to Q&A, tomorrow, day 3, I'll be talking about how to leverage all the stuff you've just learned over the last 2 days regarding WordPress security and how to put WordPress care plans together and explain to clients why that's important. So if you are in business doing WordPress things, we'll be talking all about that tomorrow, and I'd encourage you to attend 1 to 3 p.m. Central here. Same link that you've been using to sign on all of this week. All right, Timothy, we got a bunch of questions stacked up here. The first one from KCXU. What is the role of hosting providers in security? Should we really look to them to be the gatekeepers? Is it better to have a VPS or shared hosting? What would you recommend for hosting?
So both. I would recommend a managed WordPress host. Of course, at iThemes, we recommend and really believe in Nexus's managed WordPress hosting. But there are a lot of different managed WordPress hosting providers that you can use. But managed WordPress hosting is the big thing that you want to be looking for. You don't want to be using $2, $3 a month shared hosting. In terms of a VPS, I would say there are a lot of people who use a VPS that maybe shouldn't be using a VPS. I really wouldn't recommend using a VPS unless you are a technical user. I would recommend using managed hosting because they can help you a lot with configuration and things like that. We do sometimes have people that come into support who have a managed VPS, but they don't really understand how it functions. And when something like their OpenSSL version is too old and they don't know how to update it and things break, they don't know what to do. Whereas if you're using a managed WordPress provider, they'll take care of that for you. And if those things I just said of an OpenSSL version and things like that, you don't know what that is, I would say I would recommend being a managed WordPress hosted user. In terms of what falls to the plugin, what falls to the host, I think it's a partnership between the two. You want the solid foundations. If your host is completely insecure and they're not properly securing your network, there's nothing that iThemes security can do to really protect you at that point if just your actual hosting platform is insecure and can easily be compromised. But there are some things that iThemes security will do much better than your hosting provider. Things like being able to provide monitoring features in your dashboard, two-factor, saying these are specific software that I want to have updated, update these plugins at this time. Those are things that we think work great in the plugin level. But of course, you want your host to be secure as well.
Great answer. Great question. Let's see. Another question here from John M. John would like to know if there's a way we can view security incidents through sync.
So I think you could set up iThemes sync reports to send you certain security reports, but I don't think we have as detailed an user interface on the sync side of things for getting that information. So you'd really want to go through the logs inside of iThemes security itself. What you can do is you can use iThemes security's iThemes sync's one-click logins. So you can go into iThemes sync and you can just click the admin button and you'll be straight away taken into the admin area without needing to log in. And then you can dive into the logs there. But we don't have yet the same interface that exists in iThemes security on iThemes sync.
Right. Let's see. William has a question here. Do the automated actions that you talked about earlier, do those work off of the server cron or the WP cron?
So we use actually two methods. We prefer to use the WordPress cron. And so that was what's showing the ITSEC scheduler cron. So we try and use the WordPress cron. If we detect that it's unreliable, we kind of have our own backup cron, but you really want it to be using WordPress's cron. And then this is one of those things where if you're using managed host, they probably take care of it for you. You probably want to turn off WordPress's automatic cron and trigger it from a cron file. And most hosts will do that either at every 1 minute or every 5 minutes or something like that, and it'll do that for you. If you're managing your own VPS, this is something you'd have to configure yourself, and there's some articles on the web that you can find that'll do that to switch WP cron to being fired by the system cron, which you do want to do. But again, it's one of those reasons why I'd recommend using managed WordPress hosts, because almost all of them will take care of that for you.
All right. Sal had a question when you were showing the snippet regarding limiting two-factor methods for certain users. What if you're using a third-party plugin for two-factor, such as Duo? Does that snippet work with third-party plugins?
No, it doesn't. It only works for iThemes security. And so that's one of those reasons that I would recommend, if you're using iThemes security, to use the two-factor methods built into iThemes security, because then you can take into account all of iThemes security's ecosystem. And so you can integrate it with user groups and user logging and those kind of advanced filters and the dashboard and things like that. And you can't do that if you're using a third-party plugin for two-factor. That only is possible if you're using the built-in two-factor security methods in iThemes security.
All right.
And I would say that those two-factor methods are now available in iThemes security free as well. So you don't need to be a pro user to get the base level of iThemes security two-factor.
All right. Again, if you have a question you haven't asked yet, we invite you over to the chat room at ithemes.com/chat. Ask any security-related question you have for Timothy here. Next question is from Roxo. Roxo is asking about WooCommerce support with iThemes security. He said Roxo says there's not any sort of checkbox or anything for reCAPTCHA regarding WooCommerce. Is there any integration for WooCommerce with iThemes security?
Yeah, so for reCAPTCHA, the checkbox that you need to enable is just what places you want to protect. So if you want to protect the login page or the registration page, I think are really the only two. Or I guess also the lost password page that apply to WooCommerce. And then if we detect that WooCommerce is enabled, we'll provide those checkboxes in that same set of settings for WooCommerce. So it'll just work out of the box. You just need to make sure that you check whatever checkboxes for the features that you want. And you should be good to go.
You want to, if needed, you can hand it over to me and I can share my screen and show. So yeah, we do have built-in integration with WooCommerce. So if you do have WooCommerce enabled, you can take advantage of our passwordless login feature, and you have to click a special enable for that flow. But in general, you can just go to reCAPTCHA, and then let's go to settings, and then just enable on these pages that you want to use it for. So you use registration, login, just like Timothy was talking about, and that will include it on there. Or if you're using version 3, you can actually have it use it on all pages. So
all right, there you go. So even though it doesn't specifically reference WooCommerce, those settings do work to protect those WooCommerce sections. Great.
Yeah, basically the automated protections that we have, if we want WooCommerce to always work. So if we didn't have that integration, when you logged in with WooCommerce, you get an error. So it just automatically happens. But if you want to show that additional passwordless login flow, we don't know if that's something that you necessarily want to have enabled or not. So we make it an option. But yeah, for reCAPTCHA, you just check the boxes, and
great distinction.
That is mandatory. We let you enable it if you want to or not.
Very good. Let's see. William has a question here. I'm trying to figure out how to get my customers who use a support ticketing system on my WordPress site to migrate to two-factor. How dangerous is a subscriber role for accessing your site that's not protected by two-factor?
So for subscriber users, the lowest level of permissions, it's not a huge problem for your personal site security. I would say if you have subscribers that are not public, you don't have public registration turned on, but these are approved users. There have been a number of security vulnerabilities that require any logged in user. As long as it's a logged in user at all, they're able to exploit some issues in certain plugins and themes, things like that. So if you are manually approving users, then it is a security benefit to require those users to have two-factor, and it will help protect your site. If you have public registration enabled, then that is less important. One of the cases where I would say having two-factor is important for subscriber users, even with public registration, is if you are running a site like on BuddyPress, that might be a social networking site, have forums, have personal messaging, where there's user data at stake, even WooCommerce, where your users might be inputting credit card information and their address and their orders, things that might be sensitive. I would really encourage your users to have two-factor so that they're protected and their personal information doesn't get leaked because they were using a bad password or things like that. So my always comment on this is that two-factor is important for everyone. And it's really important for your site's own security, for users that are privileged to do things, but it's something that I would recommend to all users to always enable for all their accounts, not just if they're an administrator on a site.
Yeah, very good. And in regard to two-factor that's supported by iThemes Security, Suman has a question about whether we could use Okta for two-factor and iThemes Security, or maybe we could just show what two-factor apps are supported.
So Okta, I believe, is a custom kind of two-factor flow. It's not like Authy or Google Authenticator. And so those aren't things that you can use out of the box with iThemes Security. You could use it separate to iThemes Security and have it run alongside. And if you do, make sure to disable the two-factor module that exists in iThemes Security. But just know that you're not going to get that deep level of integration if you are using Okta. I would say that we highly recommend using Authy or Google Authenticator with the built-in methods that exist in iThemes Security. They're very secure. But if you do want to use something like Okta, just make sure that you disable the two-factor module in iThemes Security.
All right, there you go. Suman, hopefully that answers your question. Let's see. Tom has a question here. Will iThemes Security help me after my WordPress installation has been hacked to repair the installation? Or has it, let's see. Yeah, basically, does iThemes Security help cleaning up a hack?
Yeah, so there are a number of sites. If you had iThemes Security installed already, that will kind of help you to figure out what was going on. Those are kind of some of the things we talked about in those WP-CLI command sections, to checking and saying, okay, what login attempts were there, what lockouts happened, things like that. So it can help in that regard, and can also help with things like file change, to say, hey, these are changes to files that shouldn't be there. They're unexpected, and point you into that direction for cleaning it up. But I would say if your site does get hacked, we would recommend using a professional WordPress security site cleaning service, and not trying to do it yourself. It's very easy, and I've seen many people do it where they think they cleaned up their site because they went in, they deleted the user. They maybe saw there was this plugin that was created and they didn't recognize it, so they deleted it and they said, okay, I'm good. And then their site get hacked again. And that could be because, one, you didn't find the root cause, the actual reason why your site got hacked, the security vulnerability that attackers were able to exploit. And so they were just able to do it again, which is a massive problem. And oftentimes people don't fully clean up a hack. They say, oh, here are a couple of files here and there, but they don't catch everything. Lots of sites gets hacked. It's something that happens a lot these days. And I think customers can probably forgive you getting hacked once, but if your site gets hacked again and again and again and again because you didn't have it properly cleaned up by a professional, that is more of a problem. So I would always recommend, unless this is something you have done dozens and dozens and dozens of times and you're a professional at it, I would recommend going to a service that is a professional security hack repair.
Robin is asking if there's any particular company you might recommend.
Michael, I might know this. I believe we have a particular company that we recommend that I'm forgetting off the top of my head.
What Sue said in the chat, we watch your website.
There we go. Yeah.
Yeah, I've recommended them several times as well. Thomas over at wewatchyourwebsite.com is excellent. He's helped me multiple times. Good folks. Let's see. While on the subject of two-factor, Sue just asked a question. She has a membership site that's using Ultimate Member, and members are view only. Do we need to have two-factor for them? They're basically subscribers, but can't even get to the dashboard.
Yeah, so it's basically what I said before. There have been hacks that just require any logged-in user. And if there is a logged-in user in your site, they're able to exploit it. And those hacks do exist. They're really probably about as common, I would say, these days as hacks that require more privileges. There's a lot of attacks that just say, as long as you have a logged in user, you're able to exploit this. So I would recommend it, and I would recommend it particularly for things like members, and just from a recommending good security hygiene to your members, to be able to say, okay, you can comfortably talk about sensitive topics in your membership, or provide sensitive information like your home address or parts of your credit card number. And that if you're going to do that type of thing, that you should use two-factor as well, so that an attacker can't log into your site and get that personal information about you. So I would really, the only case where I would say that it really doesn't matter is if you just have public site registration, and the only thing that users can do in your site is leave comments on public posts. Then I would say, okay, it's all public information anyway, and if it's public registration, an attacker can register their own account. But really, in all other cases, I would highly recommend it. Is it required? No, but I would highly recommend it.
Good stuff. All right, I have one final question here. So if you have a question you haven't asked yet and you were waiting to the last minute, it's the last minute. So ask your question there in the chat room at iThemes.com/chat. William's question, Timothy, is there a certain system requirements that iThemes Security Pro requires to run effectively on a server?
PHP 7.0, and I would say just being able to run WordPress comfortably. We don't publish any particular like RAM requirements or memory requirements. Say probably like 64 megabytes of RAM is probably fine. iThemes Security isn't a super heavy plugin. The most heavy thing about it is the file change module. And so if you are running on a more resource light environment, I would just disable file change. And besides that, you should be good to go in pretty much all environments as long as you're running PHP 7 or later, but we do recommend PHP 7.4.
All right. I believe that brings us to the end of our questions. Anything from either of you guys that you want to say as we're wrapping up?
I don't have anything, no.
All right. One question coming in. Heather, if you've got it, type it quickly. Okay. It's coming in parts. I have had an issue with a theme, ... The theme has been flagged by iThemes, so I'm assuming there's a vulnerability perhaps, but there's nothing wrong with it, she says. Okay. Any idea about that?
What do you mean
I
by
would say reach
flagged?
out to. I would say reach out to, if the developer says they fixed everything, they need to reach out to WP-Scan and tell them about it. They try and keep it up to date, but it's a difficult process. So if your theme developer says they fixed the problem, then they need to reach out to WP-Scan. Beyond that, we can't really help with that. We source the data from WP-Scan. If your developer is saying there's nothing in fact wrong with it and they didn't make any changes, I would be a little bit worried. WP-Scan is usually pretty reputable in terms of only having vulnerabilities that are real. If WP-Scan hasn't updated their database yet, you just need to ask your theme developer to reach out to them. I know with the recent hacks the recent security vulnerabilities in what's that library that just got attacked?
Freemius.
Freemius, yes. With the Freemius vulnerabilities that they're like managing like 500 or something like plugins and themes that were vulnerable. So they might be getting in, I think, a lot of things coming their way. But yeah, there's nothing we can really do on our end to have that permanently changed. What you can always do is you can always mute the vulnerability if you have double-checked and triple-checked that it's no longer a thing. You can mute the vulnerability in the iThemes security report. But yeah.
Sorry, I'm trying to post a link to the help center and I post the wrong link. The help site scan to show how to mute the vulnerability. I can go to chat. Here we go. There's a section there how to mute.
Very good.
Yeah, and this is very much a thing like triple check, quadruple check.
Yeah.
Be 100% confident.
It's just a thing disagreeing with what constitutes a vulnerability, then the theme developer is probably wrong. But without more information, it's hard to make any conclusions.
Indeed. All right. Great question. Great answer, guys. Let's see. There was another question. Here it is. One more question here. What PHP extensions, Timothy, would you recommend to disable for security purposes? Are there any PHP extensions?
I don't have a list of particular PHP extensions that I'd recommend disabling. As long as your PHP distro is up to date, you should be fine. There aren't any particular ones that say, no, you shouldn't be running this. Just make sure that all of them are up to date. And again, another reason why I'd recommend using a managed WordPress host, because they'll keep your PHP installation secure and all of your other software secure. If the PHP version on your site is insecure, iThemes security won't be able to help you. So please use a managed WordPress host and let them keep PHP up to date. If you're going to do it yourself, you just need to make sure you're always on top of having it up to date. But there are no particular extensions that would say, hey, you shouldn't be running that. Anything that is like on Peckle, I think you're fine.
All right. One last question regarding muting those security alerts. Paul asks, is that forever on that plugin or theme or just that version?
It's for that particular vulnerability. Yeah. So if there is a new vulnerability that happens in that plugin or theme, you'll still be alerted to it. It's just that particular vulnerability.
All right. Yeah. So each of those gets a number in the WP-Scan database. So it's just that number that's being flagged. Is that right?
Yeah, that number of that version. Yeah.
Yeah. Very good. All right. Well, I believe that wraps us up. Thanks again, guys. Really great talk today. Great answers. And folks, we'll be back tomorrow, same time, 1 o'clock to 3 o'clock Central Time. I'll be talking about taking all the things that we've learned over the last couple of days about security and building WordPress care plans for your clients based around iThemes products. I did mention in the chat a couple times here during the Q&A, if you love iThemes security and you'd like to give a testimonial about iThemes security, you can email us at updates@ithemes.com, updates@ithemes.com. Send your testimonial, and we'll send you some swag as a thanks. One more reminder, if you don't have licenses for some iThemes plugins and you would like those, or iThemes Security Pro, or Backup Buddy, or iThemes Sync, or Backup Buddy Stash, a great deal's going on right now, 35% off those individual plugins. There are direct purchase links over there in the sidebar beside the chat room. And also, if you want all the things, you can get the plugin suite 40% off using that code disaster40 as well. Those deals are good through the end of this week. Well, thanks everybody again for joining us today. I'll see you back here tomorrow, 1 p.m. Central, for our final day of Disaster Week here on iThemes Training, where we go further together.